During the pandemic period, we saw how they protect the vulnerable by imprisoning the majority, by medicating everybody, by obfuscating facts, by concealing truth and controlling freedom. I, like many of the organisers of this event, believe that this is a critical moment for us. Not just the ordinary rank and file supporters of the Trump and MAGA movement, although to you, of course, I am open-hearted and full of deep and Christian love. But also to people that would never consider voting for Donald Trump. It is to them that I reach out in earnest and say, if you care about democracy, if you care about freedom, if you care about ending war, if you care about your children's health, ultimately, if you care about freedom, this is the time for you to do something decisive and different. I pray for a free and fair election in November. I pray that great American heroes like Edward Snowden will be revered and heard. That international martyrs like Julian Assange will be accredited. That the defense industry, the big food industry, the big agricultural industry that prohibits, curtails and oppresses ordinary farmers will face at last the serious opposition that it requires. And if it takes me, an Englishman, and the great Dr. Jordan Peterson, who is, whatever his great credits, he's still Canadian. He's
so far.
They're working on that, aren't they? We're here in support of your freedom, our freedom, and collective freedom. So with that, I will now ask you, Dr. Jordan Peterson, why did you, because now, well, this is a segue, I'm moving to an interview now, where I've spoken for a long while. Any of you that know Jordan Peterson, well, you've never seen Jordan Peterson not talk for that long, have you?
Well, you know, it's not entirely obvious to me what the solution to the situation is, you know. It's pretty plain.
I know you've got a microphone, and I've seen you defend yourself against English broadcasters extremely well. Dr. Peterson, tell us why it's important for non-Americans like myself and you to participate in this event, and what is, given that this is a rally, that means it's an offering of optimism and hope for the people in attendance. How do you believe that we should start off our conversation, sir?
Well, whatever's happening here is emblematic of something that's happening all over the Western world, right? I mean, it's exemplified by the political process in the US, especially as it leads up to the election, but all the things we'll be discussing today are both broader and deeper issues than the mere political. And so they are of international concern. And of course, what happens in your country has been of central international concern for a long time, but that's transformed, as I said, into something that's deeper and even more significant. No, I made allusion this morning to the fact that we're trying to get our story straight. We're trying to understand what is the foundation on which we all stand that allows us to maintain the freedoms that ennoble us and give us an unlimited horizon of opportunity. What are they in the United States? What are they in the Western world in general? How are they related to, let's say, the Judeo-Christian enterprise as a whole? And what is it that should bring us together as avatars of the freedom-loving democracies across the world? So what's happening here is of immense international significance, as you know from watching how people around the world are, what would you say, looking to the United States in particular, particularly to defend free speech, because if it's ever defeated here, it's gone everywhere. And that would be a terrible thing. And make no mistake, it's under true assault. In my country, there's a bill that's in second reading, which has pushed it quite a ways along the legislative route, Bill C-63, which literally allows people to be reported to a provincial magistrate under the possibility of 1 year's imprisonment in their own house with an ankle bracelet, with all their communication intercepted, in consequence of anyone's complaint that they're afraid that a hate speech event might occur in the next year. Yes, that's Bill C-63. You know, and I've read that bill 3 times, because every time I read it and then think about it, I can't believe that I could have possibly understood it properly. And yet here we are. And there's very similar things going on in the UK. There was a terrible bill that was recently defeated in Ireland, for example, which would have put severe restrictions on free speech. And there are people in the UK who are being persecuted, and seriously persecuted, for expressing their opinions, offensive though they may be, publicly in a manner that is absolutely necessary if you're going to support free speech. And we know that, well, the free speech that offends no one requires no defense, and that's partly because it has no content. If I only ever say something that everyone agrees with and produces no emotional response whatsoever, there's no point in even speaking. Because you don't have to concentrate on what's obvious if you're going to speak. You have to concentrate on what's contentious and disruptive. And there isn't anywhere on earth, and this certainly includes my home country, where the protections for that vital right are more thoroughly enshrined and deeply entrenched than they are in the United States. And seriously, thank God for that. It's so vital. It's so important. So, and so good on you for managing to maintain it, and don't be taking it for granted, because it could disappear at any time, as Robert Kennedy pointed out earlier. So.
It is significant that the Constitution is now being spoken of as an artifact that can be changed and altered. The New York Times recently said that it might be problematic, and when sacred documents, yes, well, I mean, you're right. It's definitely a negative thing. There's no question about it. Because I suppose, yes, when the principle of free speech itself is under threat, then all other values, as you've explained many times to me, fall away in its wake. One thing that struck me, Dr. Peterson, when you were speaking just then, is the banalization of our culture. That means making it ordinary and sterile and lacking in glory and lacking in valor. The desacralization, that means the taking away of God from all things. It seems that there is a globalist and totalitarian scheme to replace God fundamentally, to remove God from the conversation, in order that the globalist state may lay claim to the edicts that we would previously have afforded our Lord and Saviour, the one true living God. But of course, as a Christian, the principle that matters most to me is non-judgment, forgiveness, service, recognition of my own failings, of my own imperfections, of my own sin. Any of you that saw the recent photograph of me in my underpants will know that I am capable of erring even while baptizing. I did some baptisms. I've not been a Christian very long, but I'm getting right out there and doing the baptisms. The apostles were doing it on day one, is what I heard. And there's no point us coming out here and having just a cozy conversation. We have to take risks with one another. We have to be clear on subjects such as racism and ending bigotry and ending hatred and allowing people the ability to express themselves individually through their identity based on that principle of Christian love and forgiveness. And I'll take a risk greater than finding yourself in the acquaintance of the Clintons or finding yourself on a flight with Jeffrey Epstein. And I speak as a man who went to Vegas with Diddy and was safely in my bed by 11 p.m. Alone, I point out. No freakouts, no baby oil.
Maybe I could speak to this.
Oh, well, you've got to pick up off that.
You know, on the subject of P. Diddy, a lot of people enjoyed his early work with Biggie, but After all, did he not cede too much territory to Def Jam and the great work of Rick Rubin?
So I was actually gonna speak to the Christianity element and not to the leave it in Vegas element, and so I think I'll do exactly that. You know, one of the things that's become very clear to me as a consequence of the studies that I've undertaken about the stories that unite us psychologically and socially, the deep stories, and the deepest stories we have that unite us are religious stories, is that imagine this. Imagine you have a choice, because you always do have a choice. So you have a choice between leaders who presume that there's no transcendent unity. There's no foundational truth. There's nothing beyond us on the ethical plane, right? So people who are tilting in the atheist direction, they're beholden to no one above themselves, or to no principle above themselves, right? Well, what I've learned from studying what I've studied is that humanity has strived for thousands of years in the most diligent possible manner to conceptualize what should constitute the divine principle of sovereignty to which every man and woman is beholden, and by whom they're judged, whether they know it or not. And that means that there's a sovereign spiritual process that even those who rule us are required to adhere to and kneel to. And if you think clearly, if you think clearly about that, what you understand is that if you have a man or a woman who's leading, who's in a position of sovereign power, and there's nothing to whom they're beholden, the tendency is going to be very strong for them to regard themselves as the sole source of authority, order, and progress. And there isn't anything more dangerous and totalitarian than that. And so this realization that Russell has come to, that there has to be a divine sovereign principle under which we all operate, including the political, is in no small part a fundamental protection against the totalitarian assumption that the leader himself is God. And heaven help us, and seriously so, if we ever fall into that delusion. Take that.
I'm very much enjoying the format that appears to be organically emerging. Because you might have noticed there's been very little planning between Dr. Peterson and myself. We just had microphones thrust into our hands like lotions at a white party. Came out onto the stage, and what it's sort of become is a polysyllabic 8-mile rap battle in which both of us advocate for freedom and for Christ and for liberty and for new forms of unity in novel ways, as allies, in fact, rather than as opponents. Some of you will be aware that auspiciously and with deep serendipity, today is the feast of St. Michael, the Archangel. On this occasion, surely we are protected by heavenly forces. Surely, as the good doctor just indicated, there are higher authorities. Because while I was listening to you, Doctor, I feared that there would be a darker consequence even than personal authority and personal autonomy assumed when there is no loving God, no loving Father, no Trinity in all perpetuity, engaged in loving unity, from which creation came. I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. The principle of separateness, the principle of self-centeredness, the principle of the ego, the principle of solipsism upon which this great culture is being steered towards. Not community and congregation, subsidiarity and individual authority, no, but some kind of Goliath, some beast slouches from Bethlehem to be born. Some centralized creature that claims that it cares for you so much that it wants to protect your health, cares for you so much it wants you locked in your home, cares for you so much it wants you injected with medications that haven't endured proper or ethical experimentation, cares for you so much that it wants your children to eat addictive and addicting foods, cares for you so much it sees you as little more than larvae on a conveyor belt, leading you to a life of sickness and deception, surrounded by a 360 sphere of illusion, augured by those great investors in media. You'll note that George Soros just bought 300 radio stations. You'll know that Bill Gates invested $300 million in media donations in the last few years. Centralized control. We would never accept it if they came out face first and said it to us. We would oppose them then. So instead they tell us that they care. Instead they tell us that they love us. Instead they tell us that they're trying to protect the vulnerable. But today we must say to the state, to the globalist bureaucratic state, get your help off of us.
I gotta say, he's a hard man to top. I think what I'll attempt to do is to weave together one of the themes that I developed earlier today, and that's the theme of self-sacrifice. One of the things we talked about was the notion that the antithesis of the power that the radical utopians insist lies at the basis of all human relationships is something like voluntary self-sacrifice. Now, in the fundamental traditions that guide our culture, we're enjoined to, what would you say, to place ourselves at the service of the divine logos, right? That's a classical Western conceptualization that's derived from both Greece and Jerusalem. And to put yourself at the service of the divine logos is to allow your speech and your actions to be guided not by your own narrow and hedonistic, immature self-will, but by the aim of your soul towards the highest possible good. That's expressed in the true speech that puts a solid foundation under your feet and the feet of those around you, and by the calling and conscience that leads you forward into the proper future. We all have that at hand, and that's part of the reason why we're described in the most profound stories that we have as carrying the image of God, the Creator who brings the things that are good into being. That's what we have in front of us as a consequence of our fealty to the truth. And the sacrificial element of that is that if you abide by the dictates of the truth that's attempting to reveal itself within you, that you will be called to sacrifice everything within you that is unworthy as you make your way upward towards what? Towards the ineffable, insofar as you're capable of managing that, right? And insofar as you do that and take that responsibility onto yourself, there's nothing left for the globalist utopian tyrants to offer you, because you've done it for yourselves.
No wonder you were fired from that Canadian university. You're a troublemaker. You're a rabble-rouser. That's very beautiful, Jordan. It's lovely to watch you go into those states. I was thinking, oh no, if Jordan Peterson takes it to crying Jordan Peterson, that's the special move. I've got no answer for that. If he starts crying, that's it, I'm out. I can't top that. But the truth is that once again we are here in collaboration and alliance as unlikely partners, but partners nevertheless. Partners come here to communicate a mutual message, and I think that what you said then is most significant. I suppose I am an apostate. I formerly belonged to the culture of Hollywood. I've been in their movies, and I remember. I would sometimes wear a hat. I'd usually play a rock star. You remember it. And I've experienced at depth and at length the treasures of the culture that are offered. Hedonism, excitement, pleasure, distraction. And like any addict, and I know there'll be people out there that suffer from and are in recovery from addiction, and those of you that are will know that recovery is only possible when you accept a spiritual solution. when you become willing to interrogate and examine what you have become and what you've become attached to. It seems to me that it's not an accident that our culture is predicated upon consuming, upon selfishness, upon distraction, upon mundanity and banality for the individual. A total lack of privacy for the individual, but maximum privacy for the state. A requirement for transparency from individuals, but no transparency from the state. Accountability, lawfare, justice, media, the institutions of your country, all turned against the individual, all utilised for absolute control. Of course, this kind of control would never be accepted if it were visible. It's only through constant escalating crisis, through the elevation of fear and the stimulation of desire, like rats in laboratories, are stimulated into distraction and compliance. When I watched the Democratic Party National Convention, I enjoyed how well it was crafted and staged, and I reflected on the days when I would host things for MTV like the VMAs. For indeed it is the spectacle of politics, because where there are no principles or values to undergird them, all that's left is a pantheon of stars and new argots of empty language. TV shows where celebrities are paraded before you to willingly endorse ideas and policies and wars and food and power that they'll never eat or suffer as a consequence of. It won't be. It's not their children that will be eating that kind of food. And when people talk about popular language like basket of deplorables, when you hear dismissiveness and derisory tones around beautiful American people, and if you're a foreigner like me, a visitor like me, and you find yourself in Cheesecake Factory in some mall in Sarasota, you think, are these the people that they hate so deeply? These kind and friendly, warm and charming individuals that don't seem to me to care a great deal about race, that don't seem to me to care about the private sexual behaviour of other consenting adults, that want to worship God, raise their family, connect to nature and experience love, but from every single angle in the name of protection are being prevented from experiencing what ought to be sacred above all else to Americans. And I say that in the shadow of this mighty pyramid phallus object. It's the right to proudly be who you are, to openly love one another as He has loved us.
So maybe I'll close with this. It's said that by their fruits you will know them. So we could assess that notion momentarily, riffing off what Russell just laid out. So I've spent a substantial amount of time thinking about how you can separate the wheat from the chaff and identify the true leaders who are at your service and not manipulating you. And I would say this: if you're being terrified into compliance, you're being manipulated by tyrants. Tyrants use fear. They use fear and they use force. And what you want instead from your leaders is an invitational welcome, right? And that's why this today is a celebration. We're happy you're here. We're hoping for your help because your help is necessary. This isn't about formulating a vision for you. It's about inviting you to bear the responsibility for your life. That's precisely the attitude that's made this country great. And so you listen carefully to those who address you and see if they're inviting you to a banquet that you love to attend, or if they're terrifying you into fear of the future and using force and compulsion to regulate your obedience. And I would say, unless you want to be slave-like sheep who have no proper destiny to play, then find the divine invitation and forgo the terror and force.
Ladies and gentlemen, I happily concede this unofficial debate rap battle to the great Jordan Peterson.